Welcome to Resource to Resourceful Leadership, a podcast for people who care about the world and their impact in it. I'm your host, Dr. Christine Pettit. You can call me Christine, and I am so happy that you're listening today. Thank you for being here. So, I launched the trailer for this podcast about a month ago. By the time this comes out, it's been a few weeks when I'm recording. And oh my goodness, did my inner critics come out in the process. Just even after I recorded and published the trailer, I was just like met with a lot of negative messages that were coming from within. I actually wrote about it in my email list that I have, I have an email list. So I wrote about it there, and I'm going to share a little bit about that with you right now. When I recorded and released the trailer for this podcast about a month ago, my inner critics threw a fit. They were so pissed off and scared, and frankly, they were pretty mean. So here are some of the things they were telling me. And maybe some of these will sound familiar to you. My inner critics said, "How embarrassing. This is totally cringe." I think I had another one that was like, "Dude, this is scary. You don't want people to see you like this. What if someone takes what you have to say out of context? What if someone misunderstands you? Or what if they do understand you and they totally hate your guts because of it?" Yeah, my inner critics can be a little dramatic. One of my inner critics was just like a total taskmaster. It had internalized these messages about like consistency and always, like, for example, I'm releasing this on a Thursday. You always need to do it like once a week. People need to hear from you exactly on time. I've also heard and believe a lot with like to the contrary of that, but this inner critic like really was like a taskmaster and kind of like perfectionist, and then also very critical. Like, you're going to need to do this weekly and you're not going to be able to. You are not going to be consistent. Just look at how your emails have dropped off. So even looking at, I have this email list that I've had for almost 2 years, and I started off weekly-ish with an average of about 3 emails a month, and they're basically letters from my inner wise self to you, or my inner wise self to whoever is on the email list. And then just as I got busy with my work and consulting, and also just a little like overwhelmed with the state of the world and wondering like, what could I possibly say right now in this moment? So there was definitely like some doubt, overwhelm, like some inner critics there too about like, what are you even gonna say right now? So anyway, my emails did drop off, and I'm still, writing emails, still engaging when I make the time and when I allow myself to, and it's okay. Like, people who are reading them are appreciating them when they get to them. It's all right. But anyway, my inner critics, they don't know that. My inner critic, that's the taskmaster, is just like, no, you got to do it and you're not going to be able to do it. And look, you are a failure. So, like I said, they can be very harsh. So I noted all these reactions and the sensations in my body. I actually, like, after I recorded the podcast and like got it queued up and published it, I took a walk, and I purposely walked to reset my nervous system and to pay attention to what was coming up. And I noticed that I felt it like in my clenched fists and my chest, and I had these messages. So I took out my kind of voice recorder and recorded them, so then I could write an email and talk about it and also just process it. That was, just like how I acknowledged those inner critics and still moved through it. I still moved through it. I didn't allow them to stop me. Now, as I'm recording this first full episode, I'm feeling more ease. And it was helpful just to remind myself of why I wanted to create a podcast in the first place. And also, it helps that I have super supportive friends who have been like, yes, we want to hear what you have to say, and listen to the trailer and are like, when's the first episode coming out? And, just like really supportive. So it's helpful to have that external validation. So thank you to those of you who have been part of that. And also because I have an awareness of kind of like that inner system that I have, the inner critics, I know that they're trying to keep me safe in their own messed up way. And as a result, I actually was like, okay, that is my first full episode topic, is how to befriend and work with your inner critics. So that's what we're talking about today. And I'm really excited to dig into this topic and share what I've learned over the years with you as well. My introduction to inner critics and like understanding them came through the artist and author SARK. And SARK is a short for, or like an acronym for, Susan Ariel Rainbow Kennedy. And she writes the most kind of beautiful, colorful books. And so I came across this book, Succulent Wild Woman, in 1998 when I was 18 or 19 years old at a bookstore, a small independent bookstore in Corvallis, Oregon, where I was going to college at the time. Go Beavers. So I'm so grateful that I came across this book, Succulent Wild Woman, there. And I don't think she talked a lot about the inner critics in this book. I was looking through it the other day, but oh my gosh, there's just so much good stuff here. But she did talk, I think she did give voice to like some of the things that stop us from being creative, like fears. And she talked about different blocks to succulents, how we stop ourselves. I think there's like the fear of being too much too, and there's some really great stuff in here anyway. And some like a chapter on healing too. So this was my kind of introduction. Once I got Succulent Wild Woman, I was like hooked. And I am so grateful that I came across that book in 1998 because it's been a big part of my journey now for almost 30 years. But then in the Bodacious Book of Succulents, she writes about inner critics. And she writes, the inner critic started for a good purpose when we were small and grew out of proportion to what we need now. And in this book, she says, learn to fight your inner critics as fiercely as you would an attacker. And she talks about learning to stop inner critic attacks is essential for love to grow. This was in a chapter about love, but really throughout my time reading and working with SARK over the years, and I've done a number of her free and paid offerings over the years, a lot of what I've learned and got to practice with her is recognizing inner critics. And even though she talks about like attacking them in this particular book, a lot of how she has talked about it over time and the practices I've learned have actually been the opposite of an attack or fighting them off, and more like a recognition and acknowledgement of feelings that were there, messages that are there that we carry with us that are not helpful now. I mean, not to say that feelings are not helpful, but that we want to move through them and not make decisions from a place of, for example, fear. And yeah, I just remember one of the ways that she talked about working with them initially, I ended up doing a program with her in 2020 2011 or 2012. And I remember her talking about assigning them different tasks. Like if you have a really critical inner critic that is like just totally picking on you, to say, why don't you go and pull weeds over there? And I remember one particular point in 2011, 2012, when I was going through a pretty tough time in my life. I was struggling significantly with depression, and I was going through a time of change. And because I was able to start working with my feelings and negative thoughts, I remember just feeling like I don't remember the exact message of the inner critic at that point, but I got this image of them just like, I think I felt like I was being pummeled by like a baseball bat. And so I assigned that inner critic to go to the batting cages, and I took a walk. And it's interesting, like, I'm just kind of making this connection that walking has been a part of my healing journey, like moving into like that movement of that physical energy, I think, and just maybe also just a way to pass the time to be outside. But anyway, I sent my inner critic to the batting cages, and then I took a walk. And when I walked, I went past this park and school where it was like a baseball diamond. And it was just this kind of moment of, I guess, serendipity where a baseball flew over the fence and landed near me. And I thought it was just a interesting kind of connection to what was happening at the time. So that always stands out to me. But that was one way that, to think about it is like, okay, these inner critics are really good at something. Like, let's let them go somewhere else. That said, an important part of working with my inner critics today is less about sending them away, and it's more about pulling them in close and giving them, and really me, what I need. And it might sound, if you're not familiar with this idea of inner critics, or we'll talk about parts in a moment, it might sound a little bit weird to be like talking about them as if they're like separate beings. But the whole idea behind this is there's a multiplicity of the mind. And it's common to hear someone say, well, part of me was really happy about this, and then there's another part of me that is sad or nervous, whatever. And so it's this idea about parts work is kind of recognizing the multiplicity of the mind. And it's also recognizing that there are different parts of us that come up in scenarios that aren't necessarily coming from making decisions or taking action from our highest self or a grounded self. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. But what I appreciate about SARK, kind of some of the things that I learned from her, are this pulling closer. Instead of pushing away negative emotions, she would say, sadness, I see you, I feel you, I acknowledge you. And of course, I didn't put not of course, but I have some notes here and I didn't put the exact words, but it's like, I see you, I feel you, I acknowledge you. It might even be, I love you. But I think it's I see, I feel, I acknowledge. And the idea is just to like start to name and feel when we're having these emotions, and not just to push them away, sweep them under the rug, because they will find ways to come out one way or another. And a more loving approach to ourselves is really to acknowledge what's going on inside of ourselves and to create space to hold that and create space for it to be okay to have different feelings. It's okay to be angry or sad or scared or jealous. Any of those things that we're taught to like push away and, fight off and ignore. It's like, actually, it's better to bring them in close, take care of yourself, get your needs met, and then you can move forward more freely. In order to be able to do this, though, you need to, one, start to be able to build awareness of those feelings or thoughts that are coming up that don't necessarily, either it's like you want to work with them and acknowledge them, or like particular thoughts, like critical thoughts or things that might not be really grounded in reality, that you can start to acknowledge them and just have that awareness. And then also to be able to really work with them, having some access to your inner wise self. That's kind of how SARK talks about it. The model, the kind of therapeutic model, internal family systems, talks about the self, capital S self, or self energy. You might think about it like your higher self, spirit, soul. So I like inner wise self, and then I'll also talk about self from the internal family systems perspective. The way I think about the inner wise self is it's like this wise person inside of you that holds you with unconditional positive regard. And then I didn't write out the definition of self for my notes here, but the idea behind self, I'm looking at this book. This book is from the book that I'm looking at is called Love Letter to the Movement, Using a Coach Approach for Healing, Justice, and Liberation. And it's by the coaches that I went through training with, Sada and Damon. And this is where kind of my understanding of parts work, some might call it shadow work as well, but where that deepened. And so the idea is that when we're grounded in our self energy, that we're kind of moving from a place that is more centered. We're not moving from a part that drives us out of fear or that's trying to protect us in a way that isn't necessary today, but maybe it's an outgrowth of some time that we needed. So I'm going to share a little bit about that here. Let's see. Okay. Well, they do write about the qualities of self. So self is our essence and can be understood by what are called the 8 C's of self. The 8 C's are compassion, curiosity, courage, confidence, calmness, clarity, creativity, and connectedness. There's also non-C words that are related, like joy, equanimity, and peace, that come with self. And I think it like something that's helpful for me is to not think like, oh, I need to be leaning into each one of these at all moments, but actually it helps me to think about what do I need to bring into, like if I'm in a difficult situation, or like in the case of inner critics, maybe I need to bring compassion to myself, or in the case of like releasing a podcast or something out into the world, some courage. And also like for me, the connectedness relates a lot to why I'm doing this podcast. I want to connect with you and share, and I hope to also create dialogue, kind of through the podcast and then on the podcast as I have guests, things like that. Anyway, a little bit of a tangent there, but that's the idea of self, that it's our essence, and it's coming from this grounded place, one of the 8 C's, or some of the non-C words that might come to mind as well. And what's I gonna say? So yeah, I was gonna share a little bit about the origins of parts work. So just so you have a little bit of a background, I'm gonna read a little bit from this book. Traditional wisdom and Western psychology all speak to the multiplicity of the mind, or of the multiplicity of the mind. We have many parts within us that experience the same situations differently. This may feel like inner conflict. A part of me feels sad, and a part of me feels happy. This may also feel complex and layered. In the Western world, parts work originated in psychotherapy, which tends to be secular. Carl Jung spoke of this internal fragmentation in terms of complexes or energetic feelings that are too intense for the system and so are pushed into the shadows. Dr. Richard Schwartz's internal family systems added much more texture and process to the concept by deeply sitting with therapy clients and listening with curiosity to the many parts that showed up. Through his work, parts and self became defined in relation to one another. They also write about how much of this feels familiar and spiritual, kind of beyond psychotherapy, and talk about the different, like Tibetan Buddhist spoke of a mindfulness practice of imagining turning ourselves into nectar to feed our inner demons. And the Islamic science of the soul, their guiding way for Sufis like Rumi, speaks of a soul that desires connection with divine, while other inner parts, like nafs, either get in the way or support this goal. And there's other kind of spiritual traditions that connect with this idea of the soul or self. Another way that you might have heard about it is as shadow work, as I mentioned. And they also talk about it like this internal town hall that we have. We have the self, our grounded whole entity that already has the answers, and then we have the parts. And the parts we deal with in parts work act out of pressure of what they perceive to be difficult circumstances, just like the participants acting out in the town hall. A little bit from that book. And, there's other resources, of course, around internal family systems. There's the book, No Bad Parts, with my napkin in it by Richard C. Schwartz. And there's, other resources and training modalities. And even though it is a therapeutic modality, there's coaching for training for coaches around it. And like I said, I learned about it in my coaching training as well. So you have these parts, and then it's like there's a recognition that parts, including inner critics, and also parts that are acting as protectors, like they act out because they're worried that something horrible will happen, or this idea that the inner critics, they started for a good purpose, but they no longer serve us. I think, something else to think about is, so a lot of times we think about maybe something that we experienced in childhood. Maybe it's a lack of safety or a message that we got about not being good enough or too much. But I also think these are deeply ingrained in cultural systems of oppression that we live in. Messages that we internalize from religion or our economic system of capitalism about hard work or doing enough or conformity, norms around gender, race, class, sexuality, ability. So all of these kind of can shape the messages and our experiences and the parts that come up for us as well. They could also be passed down generationally as messages that we receive consciously or subconsciously. And then, as I was talking about, thinking about our world and the multiple interlocking systems of oppression that we move through. and how that shapes how we think about ourselves and kind of what comes up as we're thinking about our actions or not even thinking about them. It's just like a feeling that we get in our body, or like something that you're like, okay, I find myself holding back, or like I have a wall up, or I am not speaking up when I think I should, or I feel like I always need to speak up and have the right answer. Like all of those things can come from these kind of parts of us that are compelling us into action. Now, I'm just going to share about some kind of practices to work with our parts and our inner critics that come up. So, the first is to practice building awareness of when they come up, acknowledging them, and connecting the thought or feeling in your body. This can be hard for folks, so I'm saying it's a practice, but just starting to notice, starting to acknowledge, that is a beautiful thing to be able to do that not everyone can do, and we're often discouraged from connecting mind and body or from really feeling what's going on. And there's a societal push to distract too, and a lot of things that pull our energy, that numb us, anesthetize us. So just acknowledging and connecting is a beautiful place to start. I do work with, when I'm coaching people around parts work, there's kind of a few steps that I go through with folks. And I was going to find this because it's just described really briefly in this book of the kind of the journey inward. In the journey, the steps are to connect to your most grounded place as self. And that's where those 8 C's might come into effect. And when, as a coach, when I'm coaching someone around this, I listen to see if, how they describe how they feel toward that part. A lot of times we're looking for curiosity or one of the C's. That's not always the first feeling that comes up. So we kind of coach around that. Locating the part within and separating this can be done from speaking from the part. Like if the part of you that says, this is embarrassing, could speak, what would it say beyond this is embarrassing? And then we ask questions like, what do you want for Christine? What are your hopes for her? What do you do for her? And many other questions too, but just getting to that, like, understanding, that's the next step. Understand it. What's the purpose? What's it worried about if it stops doing its job? And then taking that understanding in. A lot of times these parts are working really hard for us to keep us safe. So just as an example, like, I could imagine that feeling of like the part that I named, you're not going to be able to do this consistently, that like critical part. That it's kind of like shaming too. Like, look what you did with your email. It's like shaming. It was in my fist and I was feeling it in my chest. If I spent some time with it, I might see that part. It wants me to be seen as successful. It wants me to be seen as not flaky. And then I might dig underneath that. Like, why is that important? It wants me to be seen in a good light because, for example, this isn't necessarily what's coming up for me, but maybe it wants me to be seen in a good light because it knows that I work. One of the ways that I work and earn money is by being a coach. So if people see me as embarrassing or inconsistent or flaky, then they're not going to want to work with me. And then I'm not going to be able to sustain myself. Or maybe, there's a part that's like, hey, people where you live are going to listen to this and you're going to you're going to ruin your reputation, whatever. So anyway, those are just examples. And then it's like, well, yeah. So what do you want from me? Well, it wants me to be safe. It wants me to be able to survive and eat and all of that. And a lot of times our parts, like they go to this far extreme. I have a client whose part is like, you're going to end up homeless and on Skid Row. Like that is her part. And there's nothing currently in her life that suggests that that's a reality. It is a reality for people, but there's nothing in her life that currently suggests that that's a possibility for her. But that is what that voice says to her. And that's kind of what that part is about. So there's like developing that understanding, the purpose, the worry, like what does it do for you? And then also acknowledging, like, usually that part works really hard. And like, what would it rather do instead? So there's just kind of like this dialogue with it. And then regrounding back into your self energy and asking, what did you learn? What did you learn here? What wisdom is there? How do you feel toward the part now? So that's just like an overview of what parts work can look like. Super cursory. There's a part of me that needs you to know I'm not an expert. I'm not claiming to be an expert, okay? But I have found this to be really powerful. And at other times, what that has looked like for me is like me taking a bath and like recognizing like, oh, I'm feeling all these feelings. And then just like feeling them. Oh, there's the part of me that's worried. There's a part of me that's angry. There's a part that's sad, whatever. And just like acknowledging those feelings, letting them be there, working through them, all of that can be so incredibly insightful and also healing. And it helps us move forward. I'm releasing this episode, and so I have moved through these feelings to produce and release this episode. I acknowledged the feelings that were coming up. I walked with them. I recorded them with my phone. I wrote them down and I shared them. And also just coming into this space and recording, I'm grounding in qualities of self-leadership. In particular, I grounded in confidence. Confidence that done is better than perfect, that this episode will help at least one person, even if it's just me, by speaking. Another quality that I'm tapping into is courage. Courage to be a human with a microphone, and the courage to share what is on my mind. And connectedness, a desire to connect with you, dear listener. I'm feeling a little bit like Lady Whistledown as she starts her missives with dear readers. But dear listeners, I thank you so much for listening. Those are just some of the ways that I understand inner critics and these parts and how I work with them. And I hope that this is helpful for you, that you're taking something away. And so that's my reflection question for you right now. What is something that you're taking away from this episode? What might you bring into your own life? And I just really want to thank you for listening. So, wrapping up now. If you want to hear more, please follow or subscribe. And to support the show, please leave a 5-star review and share it with a few people who you think would appreciate it. Thank you so much.